The cess, in a sense, has replaced spending in the regular budget on education and health. That's unfortunate because actually it was a good idea to actually say that let's incrementally grow our spending on these two vital ways of including people in our growth story. Budget do to actually enhance job creation? The only direct thing that it can do is actual spending, and particularly spending on infrastructure. And on that count, I think the budget did very well in terms of expanding investment in public infrastructure. It grew by over 30%, as you know. Second, incentivizing states to spend more on infrastructure with a scheme to provide loan guarantees from the union to the states so that they could borrow more and spend more on infrastructure. In terms of investment in public health and education, I suppose my expectations were low and nothing much happened in the budget on health and education. The education budget did go up. I think it's up by around 12%. But I'm still trying to figure out exactly where the increases are showing. If you take that percentage of GDP that was being spent by the union government on education and health, if you add to it the cess, we're spending a lot less now. So the cess, in a sense, has replaced spending in the regular budget on education and health. This is not only in the current government, in the previous government as well, but it's become a bigger part of the total education and health budget today. The cess is contributing more and more of that. And that's unfortunate because actually it was a good idea to actually say that let's incrementally grow our spending on these two vital ways of including people in our growth story. I agree that there are limits to what the union budget can do because health and education are, especially primary education, schooling is a state subject. But there are various union schemes that are possible to incentivize states to do the right things. So my hope is that in the next months, we will see something very systematically coming through that will incentivize states to do the right things for education in particular. The new education policy is a sensible document. It has many of the right what's. I'm more concerned about the how. How will we actually implement that new education policy when it comes to schooling, when it comes to higher education? I think it needs to get a lot more attention from union government and state governments. First of all, the place of Rahul Bajaj will remain vacant forever because it's very difficult for any one individual to fill his shoes. Yeah, I mean, he was one of a kind. Our best way of paying tribute to Rahul Bajaj's memory is by more of us behaving and thinking and following the ethos that he had. And that most certainly includes being more independent, being more articulate, being clearer in what our positions are, being much franker in what we say, in speaking truth to power, all of those things. I really believe that the best way for Indian industry to thrive in the long run is in an open economy. That if you have tariffs, if you have a tax on imports, that many economists will argue and tell you that a tax on imports is the same as a tax on exports. You end up disincentivizing exports when you tax imports. Let me give you an example from our own sector. right? We're in the engineering sector, as you mentioned. We export a reasonable amount of what we make, 25% of what we make each year. We find many markets to be very attractive for us. What do we struggle with? This year, what we've struggled with more than anything else is huge increases in steel prices. One of the reasons for the rise in steel prices is the way in which demand worldwide has taken off. That's a global phenomenon. But one of the reasons why steel prices are as high as they are also is because steel carries a tariff in India. So it carries a tariff of somewhere between, depending on the kind of steel, I think it's somewhere between 7.5% and 10%. It ends up spreading inefficiency and cost throughout the economy. Let's take another sector, which is very labor intensive, like the garment sector, right? If you have a tariff on fabric, you end up actually not just affecting the garment companies, but you end up affecting them much more for other things than fabric. The only way we can be a really effective long-term international player is if our tariffs come down, and they have to come down over time to zero. And I think 10 years is a long enough period for us to say, I mean, we've had protection for decades. Surely in the next 10 years, we should be able to compete with the best in the world. And if we can't, I make that comment. We don't deserve to exist. Industry as a broad category and social activism tends not to happen. I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm not trying to say that, listen, we shouldn't be more socially active. We shouldn't be commenting on more things as citizens and as influential citizens. I think for too many years in Indian industry, we had this culture of going to the government for things. The license Raj bred that. And it bred the fact that we would go to the government and ask for incentives or ask for protection or ask for favors here and there and so on. And many of those regulations have gone since 1991. But that mindset still continues, unfortunately. Big example, the monsoon fails. Everyone looks to the government and says, what's the government doing? Listen, the monsoon failing is an act of God, right? Can you mitigate the effects? Yes, that you can look to the government for. But you can't blame the government for the monsoon failing, right? Second, Kingfisher Airlines goes out of business or Jet Airways goes out of business. What's the government doing? Honestly, the government should be doing nothing. It's a private company. The private company is private shareholders. The private company has failed. Why does the government have a role to play? The banks have a role to play. They have to follow through and declare those assets non-performing and so on. But the government has no role to play. So I think, we have to get beyond this thing of expecting the government to, be all powerful and, the source of business and wealth and everything else. It's not. It's there for governance, full stop. And it's not there to actually run the economy and make it work and make orders and sales happen for companies. That's for companies to do. So I think we have to figure this out, because only when we figure that out and recognize that we must not be dependent on the government for our success. Whether state government, union government, doesn't matter, but we must not be dependent on the government for our success. We have to be dependent on doing a good job such that our customers want to buy our products and pay us a decent price for them. Full stop. Yeah. And I think only when we approach it that way will we make that shift to then being much more independent, even in the way in which we speak to the government.